So hi, welcome to End Credit Reviews. This is Tyler from End Credit Reviews.
And the Big Steve, aka Steven Lawson, on YouTube and Instagram.
Alright, so Superman is coming out pretty soon, which means that the DC Extended Universe, or whatever it's called nowadays this time, will be officially rebooted. So Steve and I thought that would be a good time to look back on the DC Extended Universe from Man of Steel to Aquaman Lost Kingdom. And I'm going to rank them for I think our worst to best, but Steven, of course, is going to give his 2 cents on these movies. And looking back on the DC Extended Universe in retrospect is that the flaw with this whole cinematic universe is that it was consistently inconsistent, where they constantly kept changing direction here and there. And that was partially because David S. Goyer, who was the writer on Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman Dawn of Justice, did say that the leadership at Warner Brothers kept changing on average every year and a half, so that's part of the reason why it was inconsistent. Not to mention that there's this whole thing of, well, we're going to try to be different from the MCU, and they kind of caved into pressure and decided we're just going to be like a diet version of the MCU, which ended up pleasing nobody. So hopefully this time they do something different. They learn from the mistakes from this one and try to improve upon with this new reboot, but also maybe borrowing some elements that did work from the DC Extended Universe.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that regardless of what people think of how the DCEU turned out, I think there are parts or aspects of what happened that you can objectively say that they felt different from Marvel, and if done properly, I think they could have worked for the long term, but that sort of just all over the place model of just let's go dark, let's go Marvel Light, let's go very colorful like Thor Love and Thunder. You know, it just, while some aspects of these types of superhero genres are understandable for certain characters, you need to have a sense of direction, and that was just lost very early on, especially after Snyder kind of stepped back. For better or worse, I think that even if things don't work out for the best, you need that sort of leadership figure. But yeah.
So, in my opinion, the worst movie of the DC Extended Universe, the movie that is the bottom of this list, and I think most people would agree with me on this, or at least one of the worst movies in the DC Extended Universe, would be Wonder Woman 1984. For me, this movie was flat out bad. Aside from just being a bad movie, I mean, it was more than just bad, but it was also, in a way, just really out there, and what were they thinking, where a director felt like that she had too much creative control of the project. I mean, the movie was very expensive for what it was budget-wise, but there is a solid hour that goes by without an action scene happening. Not to mention that we have this whole character of Cheetah, who becomes Cheetah, like, off-screen. She's like, I want to be, like, an alpha predator, or whatever it was in that. And then, out of nowhere, she's Cheetah now. We don't see her transform or anything like that. And the way that she defeats the Maxwell Lord character at the end, and how she gets into his mind, and just the way they go about it, that was the moment where, how do I say this? The movie's head got shoved up so high its own rectum by that point, and how pretentious it got. It was just painfully, just thinking about it is just bad. And of course, by pure convenience, when he goes back to where he was, he happens to find his son or adopted son, whatever it was. And yeah, this was, I know they were trying to go for the tone of maybe like the Richard Donner Superman movies from the past, but this was definitely more in line with like Superman 4 The Quest for Peace level of ridiculousness in a way. And not to mention, too, how the double standard is when it comes to the fact that Wonder Woman wishes for your love interest to be back, but of course hijacks the body of this guy, doesn't know it, and she sleeps with him. And I imagine the guy would want to do that with Wonder Woman, but imagine how awkward, at the very least, to put it lightly, would have been if the genders were reversed. Like, let's say if it was a man who did that to a woman, but she didn't know that she was having sex with this guy, and she had no knowledge of it. I'm just saying,
Yeah, no, it's a valid point. Got to stay consistent.
On H1F scale, I would give this movie an F.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know if I can say... This is definitely, I think, in the top 3 worst for me. I do kind of want to say it defaults to the worst, just for the fact that it pretty much flubbed in every category to me. I think that in terms of like visual style, it was a little more compelling than some of the latter entries of the DCEU, especially when some of the more forgettable ones. But overall, it was just a convoluted mess, a complete misstep from where the first one had a pretty positive reception. It was just not good. And while I don't know if I could give it an F, it's certainly a D movie. Not good. D for... Duh, this is real bad. I don't know if dumb bad. But yeah, it was not good. And it really was a disappointment in a lot of major ways.
I know you might maybe pulling a punch on this one because your girlfriend Gal Gadot's in it.
Yeah, I also have to account for the fact that that's wifey right there. But yeah.
But yeah, another thing I forgot to bring up and mention before you gave your thing was that the fact that they say in Batman vs Superman: Dawn of Justice, it's like, oh yeah, I turned my back from mankind after World War I. But then explain this, Wonder Woman?
Except for shopping! Yeah, no.
I think they could have explained that, like, what if the wish was, like, go back to normal in that, or whatever. That way it would... I know it would make this movie pointless, but at the same time it would have at least helped the continuity of the DC Extended Universe.
Yes, again, continuity being a big problem with... I mean, most of these big franchises, but especially in the DCEU at this point, this was... definitely a major misstep, and that sort of, we're making a movie because we want to make money and commercialize off of the success of the first, but why are we making this like in the actual story?
To quote one of the villains, to quote one of the villains from the Tom and Jerry movie from the 1990s, we got to have Monday.
Yes.
That needs to be memed more often.
Absolutely.
Above that one, just by... I don't know, centimeters, is Birds of Prey and the Emancipation of one Harleen Quinzel. This is bad. It's not like pretentious bad like Wonder Woman 1984, like a different whole nother level of bad. This one is just generic bad. I mean, the thing is that with Harley Quinn, I mean, it's fine if you give her maybe her own movie objectively, like a short thing, especially if you're looking at the Harley Quinn from Batman the Animated Series, but I'm just not a fan of this whole uber hot topic take on the character, and the fact that she takes out a whole entire police precinct all by herself like she's the Terminator. And the thing is that they overestimate how powerful Harley Quinn is, especially from Batman the Animated Series, where she comes from, and that just really felt... I know it's a comic book movie, but I'm like, I cannot buy any of this whatsoever. And there's definitely some iffy casting decisions. You have Jernese Smollett-Bell, who is the sister of Jesse Smollett, the guy who faked the hate crime. Black Canary, of course, in the comics and the various animated series we've seen her in, she is, a white woman with blonde hair, and of course they don't go with that in this version. And then, of course, the actress who plays Renee Montoya, they picked a somewhat of a Hispanic passing actress, but I didn't really recognize who she was. I mean, they could have gotten a better-known actress, such as maybe, Isa Gonzalez or Penelope Cruz or Salma Hayek, because they cast an older actress to play her. And if you look again from Batman the Animated Series, Renee Montoya wasn't even really that old of a character. She was like a woman, presumably maybe in her late 20s or possibly 30s. But this is just kind of a slight nitpick here and there. But I felt like Ewan McGregor, as much as I think he's a good actor, I think he was miscast as Black Mask. I don't know why, I just felt like Black Mask needs to be a little bit more sinister of a character. This version of the character feels more like trying to be like a dark and edgy version of his Luminaire character from the live-action Beauty and the Beast movie. The only character I really liked in this movie was Mary Elizabeth Winstead as Huntress. Now, Huntress, I think in this movie was actually pretty funny and good, but sadly, she has the least amount of screen time of the newer cast, which really disappointed me. And yeah, I mean, part of it does help that I've been low-key crushing on Mary Elizabeth Winstead since Final Destination 3. And I don't know if you knew this, Steven, or any of the listeners, but did you know that Mary Elizabeth Winstead is the second cousin to Ava Gardner?
I did not know that. That is an interesting fact.
Yeah, they even are kind of similar to each other in terms of, you look at their faces, like, yeah, they definitely do look related. And yeah, she was one of the most well-known actresses of the golden age of Hollywood, or at least considered one of the most beautiful women of her time.
Yeah.
But I definitely cannot say anything close to positive about this movie. So, oh yeah, and that's a little frustrating too about Huntress is that she doesn't have her mask on until like the final scene of the movie. So in a way, it's kind of like Madam Web in a way how it ends. So I would give this movie an F as well.
Yeah. So this between this movie and Wonder Woman 1984 was definitely at the bottom of my list. I think we're going to have a pretty similar ranking system based on what's happening so far, but I definitely think this is a perfect example of a movie that did not need to be made and was basically just a big studio fart to the appeal of very few people. It, as Tyler said, Hot Topic was very much who this Harley Quinn and even the Joker in like the Suicide Squad. That was very much the labeling of and like how they chose to do it, which was such a bad decision for the DCEU. I think that was one of their 2 to 3 big missteps, was just flubbing some of the best characters so hard. And Birds of Prey was just the accumulation of that, where it's fitting for the time we're in because there is a very clear like female empowerment movement, which, to be fair, I'm not against, especially if it's done well, but this was not a case of done well. This was a case of just shoehorn it. Let's sacrifice our terrible Joker character on the altar of like contemporary like progressivism, almost to make it seem like our screw up was intentional. But it was so inauthentic, so bad, so many bad characters. I think it's funny that you were mentioning about Ewan McGregor. I think he and Huntress, like you were saying, were the only two parts I liked about this movie. And I did think that this was not the type of Black Mask I would like to see, but at least it was tonally fitting for this train wreck of a movie. Mm-hmm. I think in some regards, a good Black Mask in this movie would have been more disappointing, because then we would have seen like just a great character wasted, as certain films in this franchise will do later on, that I'm sure we'll talk about. But I agree with Tyler. This was basically the easiest. Hey, Birds of Prey is on. Do you want to watch it? Nope, me neither. And I would definitely say it's in the D category as well. It technically passes as a film that a conscious organism can watch, but that's about all you can say for it. Minus a couple edgy moments here and there with Huntress and Black Mask separately.
I mean, the last two characters you mentioned, I mean, they liked each other a lot because they're together now.
Right. Yep.
Yeah, and one final note, I don't get why they couldn't just call this movie Harley Quinn, or Harley Quinn the Birds of Prey. Why put Birds of Prey in the front of it, too? There's really weak marquee value.
Yeah, man. Just so many questionable decisions about this whole thing. I think it's not a coincidence that the two movies we're talking about were very female empowerment flubs that just really did not stick the landing.
And they also came out during the pandemic, too. So.
They did. That's also true.
Yeah. All right, so above that one would be Blue Beetle. So Blue Beetle, to me, felt like, oh yeah, let's make a Batman Beyond movie, but lame. And yeah, I just didn't really care for this one. I mean, I was kind of liking it in the beginning, but as it kept going and going, it just became more cliched, and with a tad bit of cringe here and there. The family was fine in that. There were moments where you can tell that I'm acting, like it was not very good. And George Lopez, I remember at one point, that turned a lot of people off from seeing the movie when he yells out, "Batman's a fascist!" or something like that. I remember a lot of people didn't like that. I mean, his character, he says like weird, wacky stuff here and there, like he's got Tourette's or whatever. But yeah, I can understand why that using that soundbite for the clip turned people off from seeing it. But also, too, I mean, this movie definitely had a bit of an agenda on its sleeve at times with, like, criticizing, let's say, America for its past. And there's a moment where it's so predictable, too. It's so bad, especially how they make movies nowadays. There's a statue of Christopher Columbus that's set up, and I'm like, let me guess, it's going to get knocked over. And sure enough, it did.
Yeah, predictable.
Yeah, and the effects, too, I mean, they're fine here and there, but I just didn't really care for this one that much. I mean, again, it's not like really bad like some of the other ones I mentioned, but this one, like a lot of other movies in the DC Extended Universe, were mildly bad, but mildly average at best. So with this one, I would give it a D.
Yeah, I think this is pretty much in a similar category for me. this and maybe the next one we'll talk about are probably, you could alternate either one because they're in a similar league of bad to me for different reasons. But this definitely felt like it was trying to be Iron Man and Spider-Man put together with a Latino character, and I think elements of this could have worked in a different, if it was handled differently. But this was very much a casualty of let's just be Marvel light. Mm-hmm. And it really showed it didn't pull the punches it needed. It felt like a cheap gimmick of other superhero movies that were much better from before. And I agree, it was overall just pretty forgetful and disappointing. I do think, this is not substantive at all, but the love interest was pretty cute and like an interesting choice that wasn't just, I guess, a Mary Jane light type of character. She actually had, some inside knowledge and stuff going for her. And I did think some of the George Lopez moments, at least for me, they were a little funny, like the Batman is a fascist thing. Of course, it's a misunderstanding, but it's fitting for, like, deadbeat uncle that doesn't understand, like, the full context and all that. So, I don't know. It was more passable than Birds of Prey, but that's not saying a lot. It definitely was still in the high D, very low C category for me. I'd probably default to like a C minus for this, because like it technically passes as a movie, but this should have been straight to streaming for the quality it was.
I strongly agree with that last part, yeah. So above that one, I would put Shazam! Fury of the Gods. For me, this one, I mean, I like the first Shazam movie, it was fine enough, but this one was just like, let's just throw crap at the wall and see what sticks. And they completely missed the wall. Yes. Yeah. I will say, I want to get it out of the way. The one legit good thing I liked about this movie was the actress who played Mary Marvel. Now, I know she wasn't the same actress in the first one, but I'm blanking on her name right now. Sorry about that. I'll just show her what she looks like. Now, I don't want to be like one of those people who just overly obsessed about, like, oh, this actress here and that one here and there. But
right.
In my opinion, she is the most attractive woman in the DC Extended Universe. I know you got Wonder Woman, but I'll have Mary Marvel.
Hey, man, she is absolutely fine. Absolutely, yeah. I remember us sending memes back and forth with her around the time that and the trailers for it were coming out.
Yeah, but also what's bad about the writing about this movie is that, okay, they're trying to show like how some people move apart here and there. That's fine, but this one, it got lost in the shuffle with too many characters, but also the fact that it kind of felt like you had two different writers in this movie. You had one writer writing all the Billy Batson scenes, and they had another writer writing the Shazam scenes. And the Shazam character and Billy Batson felt like two completely different characters. Like, Shazam was really juvenile, but Billy Batson was kind of mature, which, that felt like, are you the same character going back and forth? And I gotta say, whoever was the drunk individual that cast the daughters of whatever Greek mythology character was just bizarre. I mean, you got these women who are these big age gaps between them. You got Helen Mirren, Lucy Liu, and America's sweetheart, Rachel Zegler, in this one. And at the end, I just couldn't stop laughing, but the ancient one who gives Shazam his powers in that, at the ending, it's kind of a spoiler, but whatever, who cares? But the thing is,
spoiler alert. Yeah.
Yeah. And the thing was that he comes up to their house. He's like dressed in fine because I guess he's alive and he doesn't have. I don't know if he has the powers or whatever. I don't remember, but I'm just thinking how like this looks like a character from like the Boondocks. Like, hi, I'm the rival to a pimp named Slickback.
Oh no.
I was just thinking that. I know it was bad, but
no,
I couldn't help it because the way he was dressed with the hair.
That's a fair point. That is a very fair point. I never even stopped to think about that. But
I was just thinking of something better than what was going on with this movie. I
did like the post-credit scene or mid-credit, whatever it was, of trying to come up with the different names for the team. Oh, the Avengers?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of funny. So on an A to F scale, I would give this movie a D.
Interesting. Yeah, to me, this was definitely... We are so in sync. Like, I have my list roughly ready in my head, and I have not seen Tyler's ahead of time. And we are, like, beat for beat exactly on point, because this and Blue Beetle were very, able to be flipped around. I think this one similarly, like, again, for some of the special effects scenes, you could argue that it needed to be a little more than a straight to streaming movie, but not really, because it was still garbage. It was just uninspired. The one thing, like, I will give both Shazam movies is I think that who they cast as Shazam, and then, like, the two younger boys, the main kid and the best friend, I don't even... Is it Billy that's the...
Billy Batson.
Billy Batson and his friend, they're legitimately good child actors. Like, that is a rare thing to find that you don't see very often. And, like, the last time I can think of, like, I'm sure there's probably been something more recently, but, like, Stranger Things is the last time I can remember where people were like, yeah, this is overall a decent bunch of child actors, which you don't see very often. Usually they kind of stink. So it's not super high praise. I definitely think the first one was a big step up from this, and this just felt like a lackluster continuation that still felt very much in that uninspired, whatever, we're just trying to be Marvel light era. And so everything felt like it really didn't have much weight to it, which was not good. So I definitely agree with Tyler. This, again, I wouldn't say is a D movie for me, but this is a C- movie. Not good. Overall, it passes, but as in, like, it's not a flunking grade if I had to grade it as a teacher, but it's uninspired, it's boring, and this was, to me, one of the major signs of, like, yeah, DC's kind of not doing well. Because the thing that's frustrating to me is this was around the time when kind of the Avengers movies started to kind of fall off in a big way. And this would have been right around the time if they chose good movies and a strong leadership direction. This would have been the time where DC really could have capitalized and pushed, into the franchise into a new category. But they would have had to stick with it, and they just didn't have the cojones to do it, as well as the leadership. So it's unfortunate, but this was definitely a movie that was a casualty of a lot of studio nonsense and the time in which it was made.
Yeah, and it's also ironic, too, how Gal Gadot, who was a, cameo in this movie as Wonder Woman, and Rachel Zegler's in this one, too, so they're later in by the time it comes out, Snow White will be a failure financially at the box office. But, yeah, it's just funny to know how these two would foreshadow being in another big-budget movie that is also a failure, too, let's face it. I know we're recording this before that movie comes out, but trust me, it's an easy bet. So, above that one, I would put Aquaman Lost Kingdom. This one, kind of like Shazam Fury of the Gods, and this one, and I believe Blue Beetle, they all failed financially because it was around the time when they were like, yeah, we're going to cancel the DC Extended Universe, we're going to reboot it. And a lot of people were like, okay, what's the point of going to see any of these ones? And I feel like that was kind of the effort with these ones, and especially with Aquaman Lost Kingdom. And it's really frustrating and sad and disappointing to know that the DC Extended Universe ended with this movie on just such a dud. I mean, one of the last scenes is Aquaman being an old dude bro and in a really bad, like, blue screen behind him going like, yeah, or whatever it was, and then the brother character eating, like, a sandwich with, like, a cockroach in it. And then also, too, I mean, there was the whole controversy with Amber Heard being in the movie because around the time when people found out what happened between Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, and people were trying to get her out of the movie, and she had very little screen time in this movie. But I have to admit that the moment when Black Manta blasts Marina, wherever you pronounce her name, I clapped. I was like, yeah. I think it was the only time I actually cheered for a villain. And even the tone of this movie, like going from showing Atlantis at times and then even going to this one club to ask this one guy, like, what do you need or whatever, with, like, you know, singer going on. I forget if it was some pop star doing the singing in that. But, and then also they go with an area where it's obviously a soundstage where the Black Manta's, like, submarine is camped out at.
Mm-hmm.
It really did feel like a Joel Schumacher Batman movie in its tone and everything about it. And this one, I did like the whole Trident fight between Aquaman and Black Manta. I think Black Manta was a legitimately good thing about this movie. But other than that, I just felt like it was mostly a waste of time. And it just didn't help the fact this is the final movie in the DC Extended Universe. So on a 12 scale from Aquaman, aka Dude Bro Aquaman, and Lost Kingdom, I give it a D as well.
Yeah, I overall completely agree. This film felt to me overall like DC's, felt like, I actually said it right the first time. This felt like DC's equivalent to Thor: The Dark World, where it just felt uninspired, kind of necessary to do, but like wasn't really pleasing to anyone. And like there was potential, I will say, like in this plot, with what was going on, I found like going into it the idea more interesting and having potential than any of the prior films we've just talked about. Like at least there was a there with a lot of mystery under the ocean and a lot of unexplored territory for Aquaman as a character. But it just ended up being a bunch of boring slop that you see over and over again on these streaming services or, you know, bad Marvel shows. It really just felt like another maybe slightly bigger budgeted version, very similar to the second Shazam movie, where it just felt uninspired and trying to be Marvel-lite in a desperate attempt to get some last money before cashing out. And it didn't work. I think that the cast, especially for Black Manta and Aquaman and everyone, they were fine for what they are, and I think they worked from the first film as well. But even in the story, it just felt like, compared to the first Aquaman, where it felt like we were starting to see just this big dynasty of an underwater world that could go a lot of different directions, and there was almost a horror direction to it. This just felt like, okay, so we're going nowhere with that, and we're milking the last ideas from the first one, so this is just uninspired. And I stand by that. Like, it just turned into a big fighting gray monsters movie like that there's already a bunch of. So I definitely agree. This was probably my first, I think you could qualify it with just a flat C. Like it passes, and it wasn't as bad as the others beneath it, but it's not gonna be remembered very fondly by many, if any, people in the next 2 years, let alone 5 to 10.
So above that one, I would put Suicide Squad. Now, the director and writer of this movie set out to make a movie, according to him, was something that was a lot more serious and more soulful, and then the studio, not having confidence in it, decided they were going to butcher it up and make it more like Deadpool or the MCU, with trying to make it more comedy-based, and they just definitely messed this one up. It definitely felt like, again, what earlier I was saying about that Harley Quinn movie, about it being all Hot Topic inspired, this one is like the high version of that in the worst possible way. I did like some of the characters in this one. I did like the backstory of Diablo's character being a reluctant villain and with trying to not do his fire powers, but ends up doing that. I also did like the Katana character because she was just kind of a wild card in a way. I mean, she was a character, of course, under the orders of Rick Flag, but she was a character who was kind of a villain from the comics, but more like lawfully. She's not like in trouble like the other people were in this movie. And also too, I mean, I know Jai Courtney isn't really the best actor out there, but he was legitimately good as Captain Boomerang in this movie and the later Suicide Squad movie. But of course, we can't forget about how cringe in retrospect Jared Leto was as the Joker, because this guy was just all over the place with playing his character. Like, he was using an excuse just to be a dickhead to his cast members by giving him, like, a head of a pig or a used condom and so on and so forth. And I just did not like this movie. I mean, at the time, we admit we kind of liked it in retrospect because we kind of enjoyed what it was. But knowing nowadays in retrospect of what this movie was supposed to be and how the studio messed it up really did go to show how it was sadly one of those mainstream Hollywood movies that got ruined with reshoots. I really do hope that someday we do see a director's cut of this movie by David Ayer. I was just blanking his name for a bit, but that's his name. I want to see the David Ayer cut of Suicide Squad someday, similar to the Zack Snyder's Justice League in some way, shape, or form. But it may or may not happen. We'll find out. Time will tell. So as for now, with Suicide Squad, or at least the version that exists, I'm just going to call it the theatrical version of Suicide Squad, I would give this a D+.
Interesting. Yeah, so this is, I think, the first one where I think Tyler and I's ranking splits a little bit. This I would put like maybe one slot higher, but not for much qualitative reasons. It's basically just like it went in a direction that was different and had some impact even beyond itself, some positive, some negative. But the movie that I would put in this spot personally for me was The Flash, and to me that's really disappointing. It's kind of the penultimate version, kind of along with Wonder Woman 1984, of just the uninspired direction. There was a lot of drama around the Ezra Miller person outside of the film. But yeah, so to me, The Flash goes here, and we can talk about that more when we get to that. But for the Suicide Squad, I would probably put this just barely above The Flash, and that's only for basically its style, its use of Amanda Waller. I think she was definitely one of the better characters in this film, as well as Will Smith and Harley Quinn. I think really did work for me. There were members of this version of the Suicide Squad that I like even better than the later Suicide Squad. I'm not saying that it's as good of a movie as that one, but the characters in this at least had some value kind of separate as a team movie that kind of worked. I do think that there was a lot of, again, like was it Enchantress who was the villain in this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, she was pretty uninspired and a big gray alien mess thing to fight.
Well, the minions were the gray messes.
No, yeah, but like she kind of filled that role and was pretty uninspired. But and then this was also a film that raised some questions about like where the heck is like Batman and other superheroes, which I recall was one of the first times that really happened. But so this movie did have its share of problems, but I do think that there is at least a little bit of redeeming quality in sort of a so bad it's good type of way, as well as certain characters that maybe over time will be remembered a little better kind of around this whole film in general, and what a mess it was with the controversy of being cut up by a trailer house or trailer editing company and stuff like that. So I agree with Tyler. I want to see the full cut someday, if we ever get to see that. But this ended up kind of just being the definitive, for me, C to C minus movie. I would say a C minus is fitting at this point. But I will give at least that Amanda Waller, Harley Quinn in this movie, not Birds of Prey, and Will Smith's Deadshot were decent characters, as well as Diablo. Those were the redemptive factors of this film, and yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say about it.
And one final note, one thing I will defend about this movie is that I remember when some people were criticizing the movie, I think a really bad faith criticism against it was saying that, oh, it won an Oscar. Can you believe it? It's for makeup. Okay, it's pretty low on the totem pole in terms of the Oscars, what's coveted for winning an Academy Award, okay? And did you see the makeup on Killer Croc, who, by the way, was played by one of the supporting actors in The Mummy Returns? And that was pretty cool seeing Killer Croc finally in a live-action movie for DC, because we typically see, like, the Joker and Catwoman all the time. It was nice to see a Batman villain we hadn't seen a live-action movie. So, yeah, I do think that going against the whole movie just because, oh, it won an Oscar for makeup. I mean, come on, just grow up. Find something legitimately, bad to rant about.
Yeah, it won best moose wrangling on set, It's like, what a low bar to clear. Also, I forgot to mention, it just because it is important. Jared Leto in this film was not good. There were things about the Harley Quinn dynamic with him that I think could have been interesting if done better, and the chemical vat scene, I think weirdly was kind of effective. I don't know, that may be kind of subjective to people, but overall, Jared Leto was not it.
So that one, I would put the theatrical cut of Justice League, or some would call it Justice League. Now, originally, Steve and I, like Suicide Squad, we originally went easy on this movie because we assumed that most of it was what Zack Snyder intended, and he only reshot maybe, 20-30% most of this movie. However, it was revealed much later that pretty much 70% of what Zack Snyder shot was changed for this version, and what we got was just basically, again, this is when they were like, let's just be like Marvel here going forward. And what we got was just a very subpar, lousy product. Everything from the I don't have a mustache for real Superman to a very lame version of Steppenwolf being, where's my mother box? Or how pervy Joss Whedon is to Gal Gadot with trying to get Flash of Landhunter boobs, and then even the part when she's jumping out of the that flying aircraft from Batman. This is this certain angle, and we could see up her skirt for a split second. We saw her butt crack, and I remember we saw that in theater. I looked at you, I'm like, did you see what I just saw? I know that's probably Steven rewound that moment multiple times. I'd imagine when that came to home video, but.
I haven't. I have to go do that for research purposes.
Yeah. But yes, and also the whole thought part about oh yeah, something's bleeding all right, when do you bleed or something. Yeah, that whole moment when going back to again, Henry Cavill's obviously fake, not mustaches there, but obviously there, but they did a bad job removing it. It looked like the Angry Orange in retrospect. But yeah, so I think this one was just very mediocre. And I'm just so glad that we got the official Zack Snyder version of this movie, which I would rank definitely higher than I'm going to rank this one. Mm-hmm. So I would definitely give Justice League or Justice League a D+.
Yeah, this to me was the definitive, it's just for the sheer number of movies we're dealing with, the definitive in the middle, everything underneath is terrible, but this to me, again, it passes upon retrospect as being a movie, but that's about it. It is one of the movies of all time. And it is incredible how little it holds a candle. And also, can I just be honest, I'm sorry for the Whedon heads out there, but this does not speak well of your boy. He has hit some, he's definitely had some success in the past, but and I know that you can say, well, he was limited to work off of what Snyder worked with, but he reshot 70%. 70, not 17, 7 plus a D. That is insane, and with that much money and ability to restructure in your control, you should have been able to at least make this make people go, that was fine, that was okay. And it is just unanimous with superhero people and non-superhero people how mid to bad this movie is. I mean, I guess you can, depending on who you are, be grateful that it's not literally clumped with Wonder Woman 1984, but it is not good. It definitely is I would say the definition of a C movie, like flat for me, where it's just, you can tell that there was inspiration somewhere at some point, but it's all been drained out because of studio involvement and just poor decisions in the script and the execution of the filming. So Steppenwolf was completely forgetful or forgettable in this role, as were most of the other heroes, which is not good. Cyborg was like completely unimportant, and why are you there? So it is just remarkable how uninspired this version was. I can't say, like, I wish I could say this movie was just terrible for what it is, but it technically qualifies as an okay movie. It's just, that's it, you know. It is uninspired. It is the peak example of as best of a managed train wreck as can be done. And I don't think it's a coincidence from this point forward in, like, chronology, basically, aside from the better version of this, which required a lot of fan involvement and whining from the studios. Basically, it was all downhill from here. So this version, the Justice League, was definitely the start of a bad trend, the turning, basically bending the knee towards Marvel. And I really want to see, going forward, a version of DC that is antithetical to this forward.
So above this one was just slightly, but also has similar issues with all the problems it had with reshoots and other drama behind the scenes, would be The Flash. Now, The Flash movie, I think it has moments. I mean, the best part about the movie, of course, would be Michael Keaton coming back to play Batman. Just hearing that Danny Elfman music in the theater was just phenomenal. I just get chills listening to that. It is truly timeless. Michael Keaton's, I guess, at least that music by Danny Elfman. And yeah, it was cool to see, Michael Keaton return as Batman in this movie. Yeah, there was obviously some member berries sprinkled throughout. And I did appreciate they did get Michael Shannon and what's her name to play General Zod and his right-hand woman in the movie. And I'm trying to remember where it was at, but Michael Shannon had a condition to come back to play his character, was that he wanted Zack Snyder to be on board to help direct his scenes, because that's how much he liked him. In fact, everyone that I've either talked to, at least Sofia Boutella when I met her in person, and then also other people who talked about Zack Snyder, they have nothing but positive things to say about this guy, which is cool to know. So I really liked all the Man of Steel stuff in that movie too, how we had Zod who was struggling at first, but I did like that moment where he was focusing, which was a nice callback to Man of Steel. But this one, I just never cared for Ezra Miller as the Flash. And I know when people talk about someone being a PR nightmare, I know that Rachel Zegler is definitely a primary example of that, but at least Rachel Zegler wasn't like Ezra Miller, who was physically assaulting people, breaking into people's houses, and allegedly grooming a minor. So a lot of people forget how much of a PR nightmare Ezra Miller was compared to Rachel Zegler. I mean, if he's like the king of PR nightmares, she's like the queen of that. And with Supergirl, I felt it was fine that who they cast in the movie. I mean, it's a different version, alternate universe of the character. It's not the conventional, blonde-haired, blue-eyed version of Supergirl we're used to seeing. But I just did not like all the needle drop moments. Like, there's a dramatic fight between her and General Zod. And there's this really dumb song they have in it. Like, oh, we're trying to make it all cool and edgy. Like, you should have, like, a classical orchestral soundtrack for that. And another positive thing I'll say about the movie, too, is kind of the ending, where we have the Flash saying goodbye to his mom for the final time. That was actually a pretty good scene in itself. And, yeah, that was really bad CG in the Flash Force, because they literally ran out of money by that point.
I mean, it was interesting seeing the Nicolas Cage Superman at one point briefly.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, the final moment, which was pretty funny, was seeing George Clooney play Batman to come back. That was pretty funny. Even though I'm not a fan of the whole usage of like the F-bomb in a PG-13 rated movie, which is just like, okay, it's a token F-bomb to use it. I feel like that was a rare moment of like, okay, a token F-bomb was used in a pretty good effect in a way. But overall, I do think the Flash movie was definitely a more miss than hit. And on an 8 to F scale, I would give it a C-.
Interesting. Yeah, so I definitely, again, The Flash, I would put several notches lower than this. I think some of the more redemptive qualities that Tyler found, I found didn't land for me and cringy. I think this was very much one of those just with the reshoots didn't work, and it's remarkable how bad it turned out to me. I agree that the best part was the Return of the Man of Steel stuff and the to have Michael Keaton return as Batman. But I really do feel like, and maybe I'm a minority voice in like the people that saw this film and genuinely like don't just smear all DC movies as they're bad, I'm not going to see it. Like, I expected more and was really disappointed from this movie. Like, this really could have been, I think, one of the trendsetter movies that could have pushed the whole franchise into a better direction and left us off on a better foot. And this really caved, among the most obviously, towards we give up. We're just going to be Marvel. Again, you're probably noticing a theme here, but that's because it was consistent for the time. It just like every DC film that was coming out after Justice League was basically being a disappointment. There may be a couple of things relatively at the time that were still under the execution of Snyder, or like his original plan that panned out okay, but this was one that really disappointed me. I think there could have been some different choices. Some of the visual effects scenes, especially towards the end, I think should rightfully be seen as nearly as bad contemporarily as the Scorpion King in was it the second Mummy movie?
The Mummy Returns.
Yeah, The Mummy Returns. I think in retrospect, people can and should look back at some of the scenes towards the end of this as that level of bad for the time we live in. Like, it's completely unacceptable that was allowed into theaters. And it was just overall a disappointment. I am less on the fence about Ezra Miller as the Flash, and I thought that bringing Supergirl in was an interesting choice, and I kind of enjoyed the balls they had to, spoiler for a bad movie, but kill her off, basically. But it just was a misstep in so many ways that I have to give this at least a C-, if not a D+, because it really just flubbed for me. And I'm disappointed in that, because I wanted this movie probably more than any other of the DCEU movies during this phase. I wanted this one to succeed, and it just didn't. It let me down in pretty much every category. And I know a lot of it is the writing and directorial choice, but it is what it is, and I got to be objective about it. So this is definitely one of the lemons in my book.
So the next one is one where I'm like, it's kind of a pun with the rating I'm going to give it, but it wasn't intended, but whatever. You know what I'm going at with this one. Is Aquaman. So Aquaman, this one is just painfully generic in retrospect. I mean, I admit I liked this one when it came out because I felt like, okay, there's a fun spectacle here and there about it. I felt like the moment when Aquaman unintentionally, like, by accident kills Black Manta's dad, this looked like a sad moment, but the way it was edited together, it was funny. It looked like an episode from the Three Stooges, the way he died in that scene. And at the time of this one, they kind of explained why this Aquaman is not the conventional Aquaman we're used to in the comics and various other adaptations, and they did rewrite the character to be more like basically Jason Momoa plays him. And I do think it's better that he's supposed to play Lobo in the rebooted DC universe,
and I think that's more fitting than playing Aquaman. And I remember earlier saying about how Justice League, the Joss Whedon version of the movie, is like the most movie out there.
Yeah.
Someone to say like Aquaman is kind of like that as well. And what's surprising in retrospect is that this movie is, I believe, the highest grossing movie in the DC Extended Universe, which is shocking to know that you would think that a movie featuring Batman and Superman or Justice League would have been that movie. But no, it's Aquaman had that one, which is bizarre especially in retrospect, just thinking about it.
All I can figure maybe is like James Wan being like, a prominent horror director at that time, but that's a weird thing that would push it over the edge. I don't know.
Yeah, so on an A12 scale, I would give it a C.
Interesting. Yeah, so
like Under the Sea.
Under the Sea. Under the Sea. Yeah, interesting.
Well, actually, even though I don't like Amber Heard, she was more of a Ariel than the one they cast for the live-action remake.
Yeah, no, for sure. I agree with that.
At least their eyes don't look like they got a restraining order against each other.
Well, I would say except for the poop flinging, you got to give the other Ariel on that one. To our knowledge, she's not throwing.
There's plenty of room in the ocean for her to poop in.
Yes, but I'll just mention real quick because this is again where I think we're a little out of order. But for me, I would probably put in the same ballpark next on my ranking the next Suicide Squad by why am I forgetting his name? Guardians of the Galaxy guy. So the next, the sequel to just cancel me. No,
cancel you like a subscription service.
No, the Suicide Squad I would put next because this was the first one that I felt positive, like more positive than negative or indifferent about. Like the decisions were still pretty good, but I also don't think it was nearly as good as any of his other films that he's directed. And while I enjoyed several of the characters in it, and it was interesting how in hindsight Harley Quinn was so forgettable but still better than in Birds of Prey, which she was one of the main characters in.
Yeah, it's kind of like how Black Panther had a better story in Captain America Civil War as a side character than in his own movie Black Panther.
I get you, but to me that and Peacemaker, which I put relatively on the same scale, they're probably in this slot. And we'll talk about that more when we get into it. But for Aquaman, this is probably in the top, I would say 4 to 5 for me. Because it really, I enjoyed this quite a bit for what it is. The story was okay, kind of like, to me, most Thor movies. And my friend who's a big Thor person is going to be like chewing me out for saying that. But
I'm not that friend, though.
Yeah, no, it's not.
Just to be clear.
But yeah, it's... To me, like, the story was fine, but the visual effects, the scale, and the way it was directed, it really did create a whole different world that I think, in retrospect, with you saying it being the highest grossing movie, I think it was a good theatrical experience. I do think it was a good way to introduce a hero that for a long time has basically just been seen as the butt of jokes, and see him in a different light. And I will say that, like, the villains for that film and kind of the overall story arc, I think, was one of the better ones. It was a more inspired, and again, James Wan directing it, I think it was, especially as this first outing, it went about as well as it could have gone. I think it was a good theatrical experience, and kind of similar to, like, I won't put it quite up in this territory, but like Avatar, Jurassic Park, Transformers, things like that. Just big visual feasts. It was a very good experience in that department. And I appreciated that it kind of delved through several different aspects of the ocean and parts that could have been expanded upon if the DCEU had some competent direction going forward from here. But it really is a shame that, you introduce this amazing world and it basically is just all going to waste because of incompetence. So this movie I would personally give probably a B+. I know that's a big difference between us, but I would say it's definitely one I'm more fond of. Also, Amber Turd, cancel her. She's bad.
All right, so above that one, I would put Black Adam. To me, I was actually surprised how much I enjoyed this movie. I did like the flashbacks with the ancient world when Black Adam originates from to the present day time. There were moments where they had like needle drop moments where like were cliched here and there. The funniest one, at least, it wasn't intended to be. I mean, it's intended to be kind of funny, but it wasn't as funny as it was intended to be, at least for me, with the context of the time. So there's a moment when Black Adam and the other, Justice League, the light version of them, or Justice Society, I think that's what they were called in this
Justice Society, yeah.
Okay, yeah. They're attacking the compound for the bad guys, and they're playing a Kanye West song. And at the time, he was in trouble. He, said some stupid stuff like he usually does once in a while. And the thing was, I was just laughing at that moment and of how, like, if this movie would have come out a little bit later, they probably would have chosen a different song. I mean, I imagine the Israelis' cut of this movie would be oh my God. Yeah. That's for the edit for a lot of songs they have. Every time they play a Kanye West song, it's just that.
Right.
The halftime show for Kanye West was just a reenactment of Triumph of the Will.
Oh, no!
That's an idea for real. I should do that. But anyway, so I actually like Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson in this movie. Yes, it is cliched how he is Mr. Plot Armor, where he's like, I don't want to lose a fight. I only want to, at best, I can only take, me and my opponent got to take equal damage. And I feel like for the physicality for him, how big he was, and especially how he looks, and with the character we see in the comics, he's been attached to it for a Black Adam movie for a long time. But I think the context of him being an anti-hero, but also having a backstory for the context of why he ended up the way he was, I do like the bait and switch of how you think it's the kid, but it turns out to be the father character. And I feel like that was a good tragic aspect of it. In early ways, it reminded me of an early script draft of the Tom Cruise Mummy movie with the various flashbacks. In fact, it does have some actors from the Universal monster movies. I mean, of course, we got Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who played the Scorpion King in The Mummy Returns. You also have Aldous Hodge as Hawkman, who was in the Invisible Man movie from 2020. He played the detective guy who was a friend of Cecilia. And then you also have the villain of the movie, I forget his name, but he was also in the Tom Cruise remake of The Mummy as one of the members of Prodigium. So this one, I did like Pierce Brosnan a lot as Dr. Fate, especially the effects they did to like, oh, let's just trick him to this mirage and that to, trick Black Adam to let his guard down, or when he's like multiplying, attacking the big bad villain who's becoming like a demon monster at the end. I did like that part of it. But for me, I just don't think it was really that great of a movie in retrospect. There's some cliched stuff here and there was trying to be like the MCU, but at the same time, I do have a soft spot for it. I mean, part of it is the whole funny meme part where he's flying really fast and they go to a certain camera angle, his head is like really close to his body is so tiny. I think I made a meme a while back where I'm like,
it's a great meme
where it shows him as this rock, no pun intended, but and then it shows Imhotep smiling from the Mummy and says,
"An unstoppable force meets an immovable object."
Yeah. And when it shows him like being all skinny without his powers and that sort of deal, I'm like, we got Imhotep at home, because he did look like Imhotep from the Mummy.
That's right.
Which is great. I love that movie. Just like trying to reference it as much as I can. But in H1F scale, I would give Black Adam a B-.
I hear you. Yeah, actually, I for a second kind of completely spaced on this film, but it's so roughly in the same ballpark for me sequentially as like The Suicide Squad and what is it? Peacemaker.
Oh, that's like a TV show.
Yeah. So it's roughly in that category. I may have to put it just below those in like the solid B territory, because this movie really felt like a whole bunch of different things. It felt like, okay, so for the story, this is kind of the Arabic Black Panther, where there's like a very super mineral, that can be used and isn't found anywhere else on Earth, that is being exploited, to make super technology and yada, yada, yada. And the villain was pretty forgettable, but a big red thing, kind of like a big gray thing to hit, like a lot of these movies. And I agree with Tyler that, while the character of, I almost said The Rock, but of Black Adam.
Well, it's basically, might as well.
It is. But of Black Adam was kind of complicated. I didn't love him as I think some of the best, anti-hero characters are. But I agree that there was a lot of cool spectacle in it. This was definitely one of the, if not the only, post-Justice League film that I thought was passable. And I really liked Dr. Fate. I want to see more Dr. Fate, as well as Hawkman. I think Hawkman was pretty good in this film. But it ultimately is just, again, another casualty of being released when it was. That kind of limits how good it could have been and the context of the future. I'll be curious to see in a future DC universe property how they introduce Black Adam, and would like there to be some involvement with Shazam pretty early on, because that's kind of a fundamental part of the story. But for what it was, I thought it was, decent. In some areas it was better than I expected. In quite a few areas it met my expectations, and in a few it was kind of disappointing. So I think anywhere from a B- to a B is a fitting grade for this film. And this movie I would probably give it just a hair over the Suicide Squad, just because there were certain moments I know for a fact I liked better in this. So it had a few moments of higher highs than the Suicide Squad did, and that's largely just due to the characters and the scale of the story. But I gotta tell it like it is. So I think I preferred this one, but it's still in the fine category.
Yeah, I see. So above that one, I would put Shazam. So Shazam, I thought it was enjoyable for what it was. I did like the villain of the movie, how, again, he's not really like the conventional Black Adam villain. I would rather prefer to see that one in retrospect. How the more serious villain, especially like in the sequel in that, but that was kind of Dwayne The Rock Johnson's idea to kind of have his own movie first. Mm-hmm. And they set him up like, oh, he's gonna fight Superman, but it's like, shouldn't he fight like Shazam because they're rivals in the comics and that sort of deal? But yeah, I did like the comedy aspects of this thing, and how it's like, oh, you're bulletproof or something like that, when he's trying to figure out his powers and that, like, and he's thinking like, I don't know my powers. I know how to pee in this thing. Which is, again, kind of funny commentary on how comic book suits are, how not just impractical they tend to be, but sometimes they can be over-designed. But I did like the villainous movie, how he was someone who didn't like his family, wanted power, but Billy Batson, who really wants a family, is someone who values that, in a way which is a nice dynamic for that. But also, I noticed that the guy who was the father character for the villain in this movie, I'm sure of his name, but he was in a lot of DC properties. He was the voice of the Riddler on Batman the Animated Series. He played the guy who turned Pam Lisley into Poison Ivy in Batman Robin, and he would later play Lex Luthor's father on Smallville. So this one, I enjoyed it for what it was. I don't think it's like great by any stretch of the imagination, but it's enjoyable, especially the twist of like turning the other family members, or at least the adopted family members, into people with superpowers like he does. That was a nice unexpected twist for the third act of the movie. So on an A to a scale, I would give Shazam a B-.
Interesting. Yeah, so for me, Shazam is definitely one of the better ones, and this was, I think, the only example of a DC movie that nailed the humor with the superhero aesthetic. So this one was definitely more in the positive category. For a grade, I'd probably give it like a B+, because again, it didn't hit some of the highest highs of some of the what I would say are better films, and that we're going to be talking about soon. But it definitely was funny, and like it did justice to the character, no pun intended. And I agree that the villain, aside from not utilizing Black Adam for contractual reasons and stuff like that, I think that they did a pretty good job with this film. And this is one that I have seen, I think, twice at this point, and it really hasn't gotten old. Again, the Billy Baxton and his friend, they are good child actors, and they really sold the movie. So I definitely think this was one of the more solid DC movies. And also, I think, not to go too much on a side tangent, but one of the things I really liked about this movie, as well as some of the more important like moments in like Justice League and Wonder Woman, is the connection between like the Greek pantheon. That I think is important for a lot of reasons in the DC movies, even more so than, like, I know Marvel has characters like Hercules and stuff, but DC seems more attached to the hip to the Greek Western pantheon. And so it was really nice to see that worked in to this movie as well, to have kind of that power set and those characters important and integral to multiple stories, and especially in the case of Shazam. So I really enjoyed it. I hope that the actors find success. I know that the guy that plays adult Shazam has been recently going like kind of MAGA, anti-woke stuff in a very like inauthentic way. You can tell it's like forced and just trying to like make money after the fact that his career's not going the way he wanted, which is unfortunate. I think that a lot of there's a term about like Washington is Hollywood for ugly people. So yeah. You can see where like there is this trend for, regardless of the side you end up on, like this political opportunism that can happen. And I do hope that these actors don't end up selling themselves out and do get another shot at more competent directed franchises or films. But Shazam, I enjoyed a lot.
So about that one, I would put Wonder Woman. So Wonder Woman, I think, is, at least when the DC Extended Universe started off, even the people who hated on the first few movies really enjoyed this one a good amount. And I think Steve and I would agree that I think a lot of that was partially because it was a female lead, and kind of, well, it wasn't like as bad as agenda stuff we see in other female-led movies, or at least ones of its time, but there was a little bit of a mild agenda with this one. Mainly the fact that there's a moment when Wonder Woman's trying to defeat this one German sniper in this tower, and this guy can't like shoot it or whatever. Some have called it kind of Freudian. And then she jumps this, part of the church top of the tower and destroys it, instead of just jumping to the top and just taking the guy out. Instead of like, doesn't have to like demolish it. And then she's kind of on the church itself, being worshipped as someone. Mm-hmm. In a way that you can kind of see that's a little bit of objectively as a part of messaging right there. But yeah. I did think Gal Gadot gave a good performance in this movie, particular as Wonder Woman. I don't think she's really that good of an actress, but I think the direction by Patty Jenkins, especially because of the fact that she was restricted in the right ways and did have good consulting on this movie and was more focused on trying to make a movie without it all going to her head, what we saw with Wonder Woman 1984. And I think with this one, they set in World War One instead of World War II because that's when the character was created, but they didn't want to make comparisons with like Captain America, the First Avenger. So this one, I did enjoy it for what it was. I think the soundtrack was really catchy. I did like the villains in the movie. I do disagree with the whole criticism by saying that, it's best 2/3 of the movie, because I guess they didn't like the third act and how it became comic booky and action-packed, but it's a comic book movie. What are you talking about here? And the thing is, I also liked Elaine Anya as Dr. Poison, and I know her best as playing Alyra as one of Dracula's brides from Van Helsing, so it's nice to see her get work again, or at least in a mainstream Hollywood movie.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think this is definitely one of the better movies in the DC Extended Universe. Some think it's the best movie, or at least one of the top 3 ones, but I would give it a B-.
Interesting. Yeah, to me, this and Aquaman and Man of Steel are all in the same rough area. They're much better than they are worse. They had some good ideas going on, and some compelling aspects to the film, especially like the villains and the world they were building, was kind of most cohesive. And I think a lot of Snyder's involvement was present at the time, especially in this film, and it showed. So I think that, again, while Tyler's right that Gal Gadot, I'm sorry, honey, but she may not be the most talented actress. IDF burst through the window right now and like just tackles me. But yeah, it's, while she is fine as an actress, this definitely was a good addition that had some direction and kind of that surprise with who Ares ended up being. I think it was effective. There was a point where I'm like, well, did that really work for me? But I think it did in the long run, and I think it was kind of cool how they introduced the old elements of the old gods still around. Wait, no, it's the new gods, excuse me. Of, like Zeus and Ares and Poseidon and all that. So it was cool to introduce that and how they handled it, along with Wonder Woman's character discovering the rest of the world and serving, kind of parallel to Superman, is like a symbol of hope for women, a symbol of like the heights of who we can be as people. It was a very impactful message. And I also liked, I'm forgetting her boyfriend's name in it, but Steve, the
Chris Pine's character.
Yeah, Chris Pine's character. He was also a pretty solid addition in this film. I do think his involvement was questionable in the sequel for a whole bunch of reasons that we talked about. But this was a solid film, and if I had to give it a grade, I would probably similarly say it's in the B+ to low A- territory for me, because there were some elements of it that felt a little slow, but overall a lot more to give a thumbs up about than a thumbs down.
I mean, when it comes to casting with Wonder Woman, I think the best actress to play Wonder Woman at the time would have been Alexandria Daddario, because she looks a lot like that character, at least in my opinion, more than the actress who ended up playing Wonder Woman. Above that one, I would put Zack Snyder's Justice League. Now, I'm just so grateful we got this movie to exist. Is it excessive at times with its runtime and so on and so forth? Yes, it is. Is the whole moment of overly sequel baiting with the whole dream that Batman has with Jared Leto's Joker and various other characters in the future odd and questionable? Yes, and also the moment when we see Martian Manhunter visit Bruce Wayne, where obviously Ben Affleck's muscle mass does not match the rest of the movie, where he looked very thin and kind of sickly looking. Yeah, that was odd, but I'm just grateful this movie exists, that the director intended to be, and I just like the fact that the studio's like, let's just give this to boost our subscription numbers, and I wish that more studios would do this more often. But the problem with a lot of studios now, especially I noticed from Disney, is that, well, Disney, I've noticed that they've never released a director's cut of any movie. It's like they're afraid to admit they made a mistake. And I feel like they should do that more often, because it gives a reason for people to go back and revisit the movie. And they also can gain extra money, too, by doing this. You're just leaving money on the table by not releasing director's cuts of movies, or at least satisfying the director or respecting the director's vision for it. I just did like how it was more consistently, serious as it was intended to be. Steppenwolf is actually intimidating looking. And the fact that we see the ancient gods and so on and so forth in the past fighting Darkseid from many years ago, that was really cool and very operatic and very bold, kind of like we see, of course, with Zack Snyder's movies. It's kind of a common trope of his visual style. But yes, I enjoy Justice League a good amount. The Zack Snyder version of Justice League, I'm happy that it does exist. It definitely deserves to be viewed if you haven't seen it already, especially if you've seen the original theatrical version that was released. And I did like the moment where the Flash used the Speed Force to try to save everybody. That was really nice to see that. So I would give this movie a B.
Interesting. Yeah, to me, this is probably my number 2 of the whole DCEU. So in the number 3 slot, or the slot we're currently in, I would have to probably put Man of Steel. I'm sure we'll talk about that more in a minute, but that's another one of the better ones that's all in that Aquaman, Wonder Woman rough area of the grading scale. But the Zack Snyder's Justice League, well, I would say that at points it can be kind of, you could say a little overly pretentious and operatic. You could argue that it's also like trying to evoke a lot of that old classical symbology, which is being lost by a lot of people. And I think that overall there's a lot more about this version, and seeing it through, even though the length of it is a reasonable complaint because it is very long, it is an achievement in and of itself, and the fact that we got to see it is a great thing. I will always be mad that we got to see how great this is, and now we'll just probably never get to see a follow-up to it, which, like seeing their depiction of Darkseid and how everything came together from Batman vs. Superman that we'll talk about. This was a very good follow-up to all of that, and you could tell that kind of how, like, this was Zack Snyder's vision from the get-go, but the other movies were just getting to this point and down the road to a part 2 of this. And kind of similar to how, like, in the Marvel films, it's so clear that just Infinity War was it's so much higher and better than a lot of the other films. This is similar to how I feel about this film. I think that there are a lot of qualitative differences, and you don't want to compare apples to oranges, but at the same time, it's a triumph for the fandom, and I would like to see a lot more. I agree, like partnerships of studios in manners such as this film did. For a grade, I would probably give this an A-. I think an A just for the length and a few choices throughout, maybe a little too generous, but I really enjoyed it. It's the penultimate DCEU film to me, and I hope that the best elements of it throughout, also just, I don't think we talked about it really, but how they used all of the heroes in this film, with the exception of maybe Aquaman. Aquaman was not super relevant in this version, but they did character justice to pretty much everyone in this film, which is an achievement in and of itself. And I really do think that the best elements of this should be taken into the future for James Gunn's version of the DC movies going forward.
Yeah, and I think in a way this is this being the third film, let's say objectively, in like a trilogy of movies which Zack Snyder directed for DC, is that in a way it's kind of like a trilogy of movies of humanity kind of going from cynical and agnostic to becoming someone who's optimistic and full of faith again. Because of course Man of Steel, you got Superman being kind of a messiah-like figure, especially the church scene where he's consulting with that priest. And then Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, you have someone like Batman who's very cynical of this messiah-like figure. And then in Justice League, it's about the character being resurrected and Batman feeling bad about playing what he did in that previous movie. And of course, there's a line he says to Alfred about, it's about going on faith, basically. Mm-hmm. So I did like, that part, just as my opinion, how I can objectively view this trilogy of comic book movies by Zack Snyder. Of course, we had Watchmen, which I think is his best movie. I love that movie. Mm-hmm.
But enough of that tangent. So, above that one, I would put Man of Steel. Now, Man of Steel, I think, is a pretty solid movie. There are times where it come off as kind of an art house movie, kind of Tree of Life-esque with the flashback scenes in the movie, but I did like how with the Superman, they tried to do something different with the character. They were trying to make this guy like, well, we really feel that comfortable around humanity, especially of how powerful and godlike he is with his powers, and how he had struggled to fit in. Even though he physically looks like him, he's different in his own way. And I do like how Zod, in my opinion, is the best, or at least one of the best villains in the DC Extended Universe. He's someone who's not like the 1970s, 1980s General Zod from the Christopher Reeve movies where he's like, kneel before Zod! This guy is someone who is a warrior, but he's also trying to look out for his own people. And in the climax of the movie, he becomes fully suicidal, violent, and vengeful, where he's like, I'm gonna make everyone suffer and basically be a complete monster to everybody and is a complete threat to humanity. So the moment when Superman kills Zod, in that moment, which I know is a very controversial moment in the movie, is that Superman was all out of options. The guy was never going to stop killing people. And when he does kill Zod, it's not like a heroic or triumphant moment like, we see in the theatrical cut of Superman 2 where he's smiling and he kills Zod and that. The thing is, it's a sad moment because he's like, am I alone now? But, of course, Lois Lane comforts him to show that he's not really alone. He's truly the last son of Krypton, which lives up to one of the nicknames that he has. So it's a really powerful moment, and I just love the fights in this movie. I mean, I'm not a fan of the whole, sudden zooms here and there with this movie, but I really do love the size and scale of this thing. And especially this battle, we have these two godlike beings fighting each other. I know people were complaining, why is there so much destruction and damage? Well, that's what would happen if two godlike beings with these powers were fighting. And Superman just started using his powers for the first time, which is why when he's fighting that one female Kryptonian, it makes sense why she's beating him up, because he's never gotten into a fist fight with someone with his powers, and she's a trained warrior, so it makes sense that she was able to beat him up at the time being during that fight earlier in the movie. So with Man of Steel, I mean, it does have those pacing problems here and there, but I absolutely love the moment where he learns to fly for the first time. I kind of heard a little bit of the 1950s Superman sound effect where he's flying through the air briefly during the flying scene. That's an incredible moment. That and the big fight between Superman and General Zod is great. So I would give this movie on an HMF scale a B.
Interesting. So to me, I would give this just below the Snyder's version of the Justice League. I think that there is a lot. This is one of those films that, in the time in which it was released, it was unduly harshly criticized. And I think as time goes forward, we're already seeing some people kind of going I kind of like this movie, and for good reasons. I think there's a lot of value in it. I think that the few problems I had, there's a lot of complaints about this film and the way they do Superman, which I think the valid criticism is basically that, this is basically just Superman being a wannabe Batman in terms of the color scheme and being an edgy, brooding, yada yada, which I see what they're getting at, but I do not view it that way. I think that this film was self-aware of the time in which it was released, where Superman was kind of seen as a cliche and an old fuddy-duddy, kind of like a Captain America. And quite frankly, I do not understand, not to, again, compare apples to oranges, but I do not think that the Captain America movies, aside from maybe Winter Soldier, are all that great. And I think that Man of Steel kind of did a better job of with the tackling by the horns, the controversy, basically addressed directly by people. They took that in this franchise and they grappled with it in a very interesting way that kind of defined the films. And so I do think there are certain things about the film, how Krypton was depicted was interesting, but maybe you could have trimmed a little here or there. Some of the how the Kents decided to kind of instill values in Clark, that was a little questionable because it didn't seem to be as much of the good old boy, do the right thing. I know that humans can be fickle, but be better, and show them the way. Some of that message was a little convoluted in this film. I think there was enough there, and by the end, it was, especially for the time it's in and the subject matter it dealt with, very effective and a pretty decent start, all things considered, to the DCEU. You can argue about, like, after this, maybe they should have reordered some things to, maybe have a second Superman movie, Batman movie, then Wonder Woman, then Batman versus Superman or something. But for what this was, it was solid. It's, to this date, probably still my overall favorite depiction in live action of Superman, and I know that's going to be controversial to people, but I don't care. That's how I feel. And I agree that a lot of that has to do with General Zod, the realism, and I also think, quite frankly, like, in terms of the outside political ramifications of the time we're living in, where there is certainly some authoritarian tendencies and dark prescriptions for environmental stuff in the future, having characters like Superman in an authentic way to grapple these issues by the horns and be depicted to a new audience in a new time, even though it's cynical, that has a service. This is one of the main characters of the Western, American comic book canon, and I think that it was a massive undertaking to make this film outright, and for what it is, it did a pretty darn good job. So, for the action, I agree in terms of some of the motion blur and stuff at the time. It could be a little noisy, and there were certain bits with the military that I thought were questionable, if not outright unneeded. But for what it was pretty solid. And what a dumb, I'm sorry to keep rambling on this, but what a dumb criticism about the, oh, well, you didn't have to kill Zod. Get over it, you babies. This was a realistic-ish take of Superman in a dark world, in a dark time, and this really was like a very cataclysmic depiction of the end of a race having its last cries and desperate struggles for survival on an alien world, being Earth. So I think that for what it is, it was, and will be seen better over time than it has been with some of its overly negative reception. But I really enjoyed Man of Steel. It's definitely in the top 3 for me. And Cavill is the GOAT.
Yeah, I mean, it was frustrating in retrospect is that he never got another solo Superman movie, and Ben Affleck never got his own Batman movie as well. That's one of the more frustrating things in retrospect about the DC Extended Universe. But yeah, I think this was pretty solid, and sadly the discourse of the time was a lot of negativity came from Marvel fanboys, which we'll definitely get into more soon. So above Man of Steel would be The Suicide Squad. Now this one was a very funny movie for me. I just thought it was hilarious that it was one of the best bait and switches of all time in a movie, or at least in recent memory, that we have this group of these villains that go to this island and we think, okay, they're going to be taking them on, but they get killed off one by one in hilarious and realistic ways. So this guy's like arms come off and he's like really useless, basically, gets like killed. And just the way they do that was pretty good. And then also, I do like how when they get to the island, they gradually reveal, like, okay, this is basically the main villain of the movie is, I'm blanking on the villain's name, the giant, like,
Staryu thing or whatever?
Yeah, that's, basically Patrick Star. Basically Starfish.
and I'm trying to remember the character's name because I remember from Batman Beyond that was a villain that was in one of the episodes, or at least sorry, 2 of the episodes in Batman Beyond. But yeah, I did enjoy this one for what it's worth. I did like the interactions with the characters. I do like how James Gunn takes characters that are kind of obscure, like maybe the Rat Catcher, whatever the character's name was, and also, or like King Shark, who was voiced by Sylvester Stallone, by the way. And I do like how he takes those obscure characters. It gives them like heart and depth and feel to them. I was surprised they killed off Jai Courtney's character as Captain Boomerang as fast as he did, because Captain Boomerang is one of the main Suicide Squad characters from the comics. And I did like the rivalry between
Peacemaker and...
Yeah, between Peacemaker and Idris Elba's character. I'm trying to remember what his name was. It wasn't Deadshot, but it was basically...
Was it like Killshot or something?
Yeah, some other kind of version of Deadshot, which is kind of awkward to think about it. I mean, they could just have the same character and just say, like, okay, it's a new actor playing the character. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention Damien Dashmelian as Polka Dot Man was great. Yeah. I just love how he's basically like, I gotta keep doing these polka dots or whatever, or else I mutate or whatever in that.
Bloodsport was his name, the Idris Elba character.
Okay, yeah. And of course I did like Joel, I forget his last name, who played Rick Flag in this movie. And the irony is that he auditioned to play Kyle Reese in Terminator Genesis, but lost to Jai Courtney, who's also in this movie and also in the previous Suicide Squad movie. Mm-hmm. I think it's one of those rare sequels that is better than the first one. But sadly is that this movie was better than the first one, and critics liked it a lot more. But sadly, it bombed at the box office. And I think part of that was because it was released during the middle of the pandemic, and it was released on HBO Max on the same day, which was not very good in retrospect, especially foresight for it was good for them increasing subscriber numbers, but they definitely lost a lot of money in terms of box office revenue. But the moment when what's her name is summoning a bunch of the rats to fight the giant starfish in the movie, I'll just think of that line from Dracula where Renfield's like, rats, thousands, millions of them. It's basically that. But overall, I would give The Suicide Squad a B+.
Interesting. Yeah, so we're definitely very different on this. I thought that this movie was fine, but kind of mediocre. Like, more positive than negative overall, but also not very for me, which is fine. But I think some of the characters, like Peacemaker and Bloodsport, and Polka Dot Man were interesting additions, but they kind of similarly just felt, I don't know, not very interesting or compelling characters. Like, they carried the story well enough. I actually liked Amanda Waller, I think, more in the previous Suicide Squad, which is probably a little controversial, but overall, this movie felt just like a James Gunn movie, which kind of is starting to feel a little formulaic at this point. Like, I think it works in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies because of how much sway he's had over them from the beginning, but with the pre-existing Suicide Squad film, they had like a framework that they clearly worked off of, and that's not to say that James Gunn didn't have his share of the say, but the characters just... The side stories are not that interesting as full films, to me at least, in the way that he depicts them. I think that he is talented at like making C and D list characters a little more interesting, but I still just found this to be passable overall. I agree that it probably should have done better for the quality of the film it was, but it also kind of just, it felt like it had a few meme moments, and then other than that was basically, in terms of the actual story, pretty similar to the first one, just a little better executed, so there wasn't a whole lot of reason to see it other than if you're a big James Gunn head or a DC Comics person. So I did like Starro, I did like some of the choices they made, and it was definitely the better of the two Suicide Squad films, but it just didn't land for me all that well, and I think for me this was probably a C+, or in the words of the teacher from the first Transformers film, I'd give it a solid B minus.
Yeah, see, one of my favorite moments in the movie I wanted to add too is that the part where these are basically villain characters, but I do love the moment where for a moment they become heroes. Even though they are threatened to have their lives ended by Amanda Waller, they decide to do the right thing and go and fight this monster, which I did like about that moment in the movie. But anyway, so what I think is the best movie in the DC Extended Universe, and I know there's going to be some people who are maybe iffy till this very day because they're, a bunch of, some are just a bunch of, Marvel fanboys. I know you would be more colorful with language and call them Marvel dick writers.
Absolutely.
Would be Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice.
Dun, 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 dun,
Yeah.
dun.
This movie and Man of Steel are kind of similar to the 2003 Hulk movie with Ang Lee, where it got a lot of negativity upon its release. But the thing is, I think it's a movie that is very misunderstood. It's a movie that has gotten better with age. And the reasons why is that it really does show a division. If you watch the director's cut of the movie, or I guess the extended cut, whatever it's called, the ultimate cut, I believe, is that you understand why Batman does not like Superman. He sees him as this threat he can't control. And with Superman, he dislikes Batman because of the fact that he thinks that Batman is just some guy punching downward upon lower, classes of society. And it does kind of speak to us in this day and age. Well, definitely when the movie was made, and more so nowadays, we see this big split and divide in the culture. And who's the villain of this movie? He's basically some tech billionaire, Lex Luthor. And what better way to play someone who's basically a Mark Zuckerberg-like character, the guy who played Mark Zuckerberg from the Social Network. And yes, it may have been a little bit iffy or not as strong as it could have been. Let's say if you would have gotten like a better actor than Jesse Eisenberg to play him, objectively speaking. They did rewrite that he was the son of Lex Luthor, so he definitely has some father issues and issues with authority, which of course, someone like Superman or even Batman represents that in a way. But I do like how Superman is trying to do the right thing. Batman is too, but he's grown a lot more cynical. But Superman, of course, is someone who is a lot more newer to the superhero game in the context of the story. And I do like how they collide with each other in the climax. Is pretty good, or at least it's kind of a double climax in a way, but it works much better than other movies that do double climaxes. I do agree that a criticism I do agree with is that I don't like the whole, let's set up Justice League, really rush it out, like here's clips here and there of other heroes and whatnot. And you can kind of argue the death of Superman was a little bit rushed in some way, shape, or form. And then the whole polarizing meme thing of Martha, why do you say that name? The context of that scene is that Batman realizes this guy who he has vilified for a good chunk of the runtime of this movie is actually very similar to him. He realizes how much he's kind of become a bit of a villain for this part of the story. And then, of course, people will criticize it later on by saying, like, oh, how come Batman's still, like, attacking, criminals by, like, kind of killing them that? Well, he's not going to switch that off, like, instantaneously, like a flip of a dime. That'd just be bad writing. I absolutely love that fight in the warehouse. That is the best fight choreography I have seen in a Batman movie in terms of playing it out. I do like how they don't take their time with Batman. It's like, okay, one at a time. They're actually trying to jump them all at once when they can, which is realistic for multiple combatants at once. And I love the costume that Batman has in this movie. I really liked Ben Affleck as Batman. Proved a lot of the skeptical people wrong. And also the way how Superman died was kind of foreshadowed early on in the movie, because earlier in the movie when we see Bruce Wayne's parents get killed, a movie that's playing on the marquee is called Excalibur. Excalibur happens to be one of Zack Snyder's favorite movies, and also does foreshadow how Superman dies, because when Superman gets killed the way he does by Doomsday, it is similar to the way that King Arthur gets killed in that movie as well. But yeah, so overall, I do think Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice is a very good movie to say the least, and in my opinion, the best movie in the DC Extended Universe. It's a movie that I still defend till this very day. It's a movie that definitely has a lot more balls than a lot of comic book movies, especially of its time, and even nowadays. I mean, we see that whole moment in the beginning where Bruce Wayne is going out of his way without any gadgets whatsoever in a war zone, driving around. It's definitely evoking a lot of 9/11 imagery with the buildings collapsing.
Is there any like MCU movie that does anything like that? Because when you saw something like the Avengers, it was like these high angles, like, oh, look how cool the superheroes are, they're fighting the aliens in the city and that. But in Man of Steel, and especially in this movie, it's more of a realistic approach. Like what the innocent bystanders are experiencing is kind of like when you watch Cloverfield, how that's a giant monster movie from the perspectives of the humans, of the innocent bystanders who are not part of the military or the scientists or whatever. Mm-hmm. So on an A2F scale, I would give Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice either a B+ or an A-.
Yeah, come to think of it, we didn't talk about, like, is there a difference you would give between the Ultimate Edition versus not?
Oh, I mean, well, I was ranking really much... Well, it's actually ranking pretty much the Ultimate Edition. I do think that the theatrical cut is a little bit lower than this one, probably like more like B-, because it's mixing a lot of that, important context of why Superman dislikes Batman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you on that. So for my takes on this, I agree. Tyler and I are in agreement on this, that it's controversial, but this was pretty much the highlight, the pinnacle, the point at which was an ultimate decision. You can continue down this road, stick with it, be different, and kind of show up Marvel in some major ways, even though at the time it's a risk and misunderstood. Or you can kowtow, be safer, and be uninspired, which is unfortunately the way it went. But I agree that for the Ultimate Edition, it is probably my favorite. I kind of weighed between it and the Snyder Justice League for different factors, but ultimately in terms of a film in and of itself with a coherent plot, its messaging, its characters, I think this does stand overall on top, for better or worse. You can say that may not be a good thing if you didn't like it, but I think that it handled some very complicated issues, both in our time as well as with the characters in the universe that had been set with just one film and a whole lot of complaints about Superman. I think that you can definitely argue that this should have come later down the road, and there should have been a movie or two to set up in between. And I think those are viable concerns, as well as maybe having an older actor like Bryan Cranston play Lex Luthor to have this angle of like the old power of humanity against the rising hope of the future in youth. But and also kind of Ben Affleck being an older version of Batman, kind of aligning with that sort of darker, older, grounded version of the power struggles of humans. But it was a pretty solid film overall. I would say that, similar to Tyler, that there is certain contexts that are basically just very minimal, if not outright passed over, that are pretty important in the original version, which I would grade as a B+, a little bit below the Ultimate Edition for those reasons. And there are some complaints. As time has gone on and I've talked with people of varying takes about it, I almost wish that Lex Luthor, like, he could have been implied to have instigated all of this. But I think there is an argument that this movie would have been more effective if they just let Batman be the antagonist and the villain, and that was it. Just ultimately the fear of humans for what they can't control wins out. And I think that may have been the truly most ballsy, definitive version of this movie that we didn't get to see. But for a big multi-million-dollar blockbuster with a whole lot riding behind it, it did a lot of good and interesting things that played off of the dynamics of both characters. I do think that kind of the middling oligarch with Jesse Eisenberg could have been handled a little better, and was definitely one of the casting choices, along with Jared Leto's Joker, about the whole franchise that I'm kind of so-so on. But it definitely is my favorite of the films. It had a lot of understandable hype behind it, and then it kind of took a lot of concerns by the horns and tackled them in ways that were unexpected to people. And I think, as Tyler has said, maybe some people will still disagree, and that's part of art, but that it will, over time, especially for the time we're living in, be received better over time. And as one of those moments, kind of definitively around the time where a lot of studio films started to really crash out towards, you know what, directors, you don't have as much say, let's just let the studios control it. This was one of those final authoritative, this is a Zack Snyder movie. You know, that's it. And you can say that's for better or for worse, but it has that identity attached to it. I also think that Doomsday was fine. When I originally saw him in the trailers, I thought he kind of looked like a cheap orc from Lord of the Rings, which was a little disappointing. So it wasn't perfect. I don't want to make it seem like this is the masterwork of even Snyder's films. I agree with Tyler that Watchmen is still probably his best. But for what it was a ballsy film, and I was one of the people that will eat crow right now. But because I was like, I do not see Ben Affleck's Batman being good. I was so attached to the vision of Nolan's and Christian Bale's Batman that I couldn't conceptualize of it. But I'll be darned, I was wrong. This version of Batman sure does rock and kick ass. And I do hope we get to see, even if it's not literally this version, a version similar to that Batman again in the future, whether it's training a Batman Beyond or whatever, because this is a part of the story that I think could be told and is missing overall from the live action versions at least. But if I had to give this grade a film, I would say that an A- is fitting for it, because again, it's not perfect. It's a little long, not as long as the Snyder cut of Justice League, and it does have its issues here and there, but it really had a lot of powerful themes going for it. I think with time and already it has aged pretty well, and I hope that the best elements of it will be taken forward into the new DC universe.
One final note I want to say is that out of all of the costumes, at least for live action Batmans, this one has to be my favorite of the costumes. I like the details of it. Definitely heavily inspired by the Frank Miller version from The Dark Knight Returns. I just only wish that they would do for once the omitted eyes. Mm-hmm. Because we see that in the comics, and I just wish a live action Batman movie would have the costume where he does have the white omitted eyes for once. That would have been, interesting to see that. So anyway, this is Tyler from Anchor Reviews.
And the Big Steve from YouTube and Instagram.
We hope you enjoyed this video, and we hope to make a lot more in the future, and we're looking forward to seeing what happens with the new DC Extended Universe and what they may plan for the future for that. Please like and subscribe.